Hi guys, so this talk covers the first topic of the series on activism. We're going to focus on how we experience injustice and see injustice in our society, as well as starting to look at how we can assist those who are affected by these injustices. Now, before we even get into the meat of this topic, we need to define our terms. Normally, and later she'll do this, we have Words with Whitney, and they're amazing, but this time you're going to have to deal with Words with Elizabeth. Sorry, not as catchy, but it'll still be fun. To have the proper conversation about this topic, we need to really define what injustice is and understand our terms that we're going to be using. So first and foremost, justice is giving to each other what is owed in order to live in ordered relationship with our neighbor. And injustice is an action in which someone is treated in opposition of their inherent dignity and any situation in which a person cannot reach their full God-given potential. That's a lot. And we're going to spend a lot of time with these terms. And we're going to unpack them so that it makes it easier for you to understand what each one of them are and how we use them, and this conversation that's so much larger than just one thing. So with that definition of what justice and injustice is, what are some of the injustices that we see in our world today? Well, homelessness, carelessness with our environment, a lack of effective, available, and affordable healthcare, the refugee crisis and immigration process, racism, gun violence, the income and wage gap, hunger and food insecurity, abortion, ageism, and on and on and on. There are multiple injustices that we see across not just the United States, but across the world. And some are happening here, some are happening across the world in China, but they're all affecting our fellow brothers and sisters. So many of these injustices that I've named are ones that we have in our society and are hidden away, and we don't really notice them until a light is shown on them. Others are ones that we see on a regular basis. We live here in Raleigh. We see homelessness when we walk down the street. And we've come kind of commonplace and expected to see that person with a sign standing outside of the Walmart, or to see, these people kind of forgotten in our world. And they're more of a problem to our everyday life than us trying to see them as humans and someone that we should be helping. And for some of us, you may have your own personal experience with injustice. And that's a whole nother conversation of how we experience the own injustices that are being put on us. And for each of us, how we interact with these situations is going to be different, and how we experience them is going to be different. And the way that we react to them is going to be different. In any of these cases, when we encounter injustice, either through observation or personal experience, we become uncomfortable, and it can be easier to ignore the person or situation altogether. As Catholics, though, we are called to rise above that uncomfort, to step out of what our comfort zone is, which is to ignore and to kind of expect someone else to handle that. And to be the ones who are seeking out these injustices and doing something about it. We're supposed to be the remedy. Christ's life is our example of how to move past the injustice in our own lives and still be able to assist others. Christ was born into poverty and then led a life of service to others and then was unjustly killed for it. During his life of ministry, he called out the injustices in his society. He moved past the societal norms and the dysfunction that caused them. He sought out the people who were marginalized, hated, shunned. He restored their trust in their own human dignity, the inherent state of worth that every human being has. And it cannot be diminished or destroyed because it is given by God. And he did this by truly loving his neighbor. And that seems like such a simple concept, but it's probably one of the harder things that we have to do. We have a complicated and difficult relationship with justice in our nation. When we hear the word, many of us think about courtrooms or police officers or someone getting their punishment for something bad they've done. Justice is bigger than that. Like I said at the start, true justice means to live in right relationship with one another, and it revolves around giving what is owed and respecting the human dignity of another. Giving this type of justice to all, first and foremost, in all circumstances, brings us out of our box that we put justice into. We have turned it into something that's to be feared. By providing true justice, though, we are able to see people and treat people the way God calls us to, with dignity, respect, and love. However, our society is marked with an air of injustice rather than true justice for all. We do not show love, respect, and dignity to others first. We mistrust and we ignore those around us. We are all guilty of observing injustices, maybe even contributing to it, to the injustices that surround us on a daily basis. Walking past that homeless person on the street, or scrolling past an article and talking about a mass shooting, ignoring the kid that's being picked on at the lunch table next to you. These are all look different. They're different levels of global injustice down to something that's very specific to your high school. But it's all the same. It's taking away the dignity of someone else. And I'm guilty of this. I have experienced both the observation, ignoring it, and also experienced injustices of my own. And I'm sure all of you have. We all understand and have felt how awful and how lasting the impact of these injustices can be on a person, a family, a community, on our society as a whole. And I'm sure we have all asked ourselves that if God sees all of this, why isn't he doing anything about it? And there's no simple answer to that question. Suffering is part of the human experience. We all experience it, even Christ, especially Christ. We are called to unite our suffering with Christ's suffering on the cross. I mean, think about it. Jesus gets it. He suffered all of the same emotions, physical suffering, pain, everything that every human experiences. And then on top of that, was unjustly tried and murdered to save our souls, to save us from our own selves, essentially, because he's God and he loves us. Think about the crucifixion. We read it every Lent and Palm Sunday. On Palm Sunday. And I'm also so uncomfortable at that Mass because we participate in the conviction and sentencing of our Lord. You know, we read those words and we become part of that crowd. think about how uncomfortable it would have been to watch this man be punished. Even if you didn't believe in what he was or who he was or what he was saying, you are convicting him, an innocent man, to death. For what? Those who did walk with him and believed in his innocence agonized with him. The cross is ugly, but it's also a light. When we refocus on that event in history, in our salvation history, we see the injustice that God suffered, and then he also shined a light out on all of the world. He gave us hope in a moment of despair because he was willing to seek out and do something about the injustices in his world, in his kingdom. And it was to inspire all of us who are saved, those who needed to take up the cross after him. Jesus saw people from the cross. We know he didn't get nailed to the cross and just die. He was there for hours, seeing the faces of those who loved him and who he loved, seeing the faces of those who hated him and sent him to death, seeing the faces of those who earned their punishment beside him. And he never walked away from those people. And the things that we would all rather leave in the dark, he shone a light on. He brought that light to the mistreated, the marginalized, the suffering. And he gave them love, gave us love. And through his resurrection, he gave us hope and a calling. And we are called to do the same as Christ, to be this beacon of light for our brothers and sisters, to confront the injustices that are in our society always, to shine a light on the wrongdoing, to bring hope to those who suffer, to walk toward the cross and encounter it. Because through the cross, we got to have the resurrection and the hope and healing and restoration that everyone deserves. Stay tuned for our following Life Nights talks. They're coming up every single Sunday night so that we can continue to have this really important conversation. Thank you, and God bless.